Hello everyone, my name is Jeff Rolka. I want to thank you for checking out my video. This is questions from comments 15. Now normally these would be released on Wednesday. However, this question came in and I felt like it was particularly helpful in terms of talking about how to use the videos on this channel. And one of the aspects in your voice production or vocal production during your practice that you might want to consider. So I'm not gonna dilly-dally, I'm just gonna get right to this. Thank you if you've chosen to subscribe. If you haven't yet, I hope that you'll choose to do so now. Hey Jeff, question about the volume I should be singing at when practicing. I think I may have been practicing too loud for a long time. Is it better to practice at a relatively low volume? Does it matter? And why? What are the pros and cons of low versus higher volume practicing when working on your voice? Great question. It has come up from time to time, but it comes up more in lessons than it does on the YouTube channel. And I think that it is a particularly insightful question to ask. So let's break it down a little bit. From the back to the, actually I'm going to go from the middle outwards. I'm not going to go from the back to the front or front to the back. I'm going to go from the middle because I just have to make things challenging and difficult. Does it matter? Yes. Yes, the volume that you practice at does in fact matter. It can be a sign that things are not quite right. It can also, depending on your usage of it, tell you that in fact things are going particularly well. For this particular person, if you think that you might have been practicing too loud, you might be right. This will particularly show up if you are having difficulties around your registration events. Now, that's a little bit complicated because, of course, registration events are where our technique really starts to matter. But if you are noticing a particularly difficult time, if you're finding that you're getting locked into one register or another, that could very well be to do with the volume that you are singing at. Now, parts of the other question here, why? Well, I kind of got into that already, didn't I? Volume as part of our practice is an indicator of whether or not our subglottic air pressure, our airflow or air breathing, is functioning in a dynamic capacity. So, in general, if you're in a comfortable part of your range, there I'm totally thyroarytenoid dominant. That's my chest voice. There's not a ton of dynamic contrast between the high note and the low note. However, if I were in my zona di passaggio or having notes that went into my zona di passaggio, you would notice a slight lift in the volume as I make that ascent. The trick here is that pushing to create volume is not what works to make those notes work properly. It's the subglottic air pressure in conjunction with proper expansion that allows for better subglottic air pressure. So it's a dynamic system. The air pressure changes on the ascending scale. It increases as we go up. And in response, we get a bit more resonance, a bit more elongation of the vocal fold as the cricothyroid muscles begin to elongate it. Some of those soft tissues resonate too, and that results in a bit more volume. But volume's not the goal necessarily. It is a result of a well-aligned system. And the further up the scale one goes, the more that remains the case. So here, there is a bit of a volume change in my voice. as I continue to ascend, there will be a greater change in the volume. And I hope I'm not clipping. I purposefully did not use a compressor on my microphone, my lavalier mic channel, in the hopes that you'd be able to get more of the volume changes. But I just noticed that it's getting quite close to clipping. So I'm going to back off here a little bit, just to give myself a little bit more headroom. And it will continue to do that. It is a dynamic process. So volume is the result of the well-aligned, well-engaged, or if you prefer, well-supported system. The subglottic air pressure increases. That doesn't, it does result in a slight increase in the flow of air over the vocal fold, but it's really more about that subglottic air pressure. That is what facilitates the elongation of the vocal fold, because the vocal fold is only using as much muscle engagement as is, strictly speaking, necessary to remain adducted or closed. The surrounding soft tissues and the soft tissues in near proximity to the vocal fold are allowed to resonate sympathetically with the vibrations that it is creating, and it creates a bigger noise, a bigger sound. We get louder. Of course, none of that is happening down here. And so it's not as evidenced when you're starting off, and you're just starting to work on your scales in that range. This starts to come into play. The dynamic aspects of the subglottic air pressure, the flow of air, the engagement, becomes more evident as you proceed up into the zona di passaggio and ultimately over the secondo passaggio. Let me see if I've missed anything here. Oh, right. I may have been practicing for too loud for too long a time. This gets evidenced a lot in, as I mentioned earlier, in difficulties around transitions. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, and I'm trying to sing too loud here. Now let's take the G major as an example. So there, I'm starting in my chest voice, going up to a G and an A on the top. That's getting me into my head voice. Let's do that again. Let's do it with E first, just to kind of ease into things here. Now, if I'm too heavy, if I'm too loud on the bottom, things are going to change. And I'm managing that pretty carefully, but you can hear how different that sounds. It's not nearly as consistent across the registration event. And if I went even harder on the bottom, it would get worse still. And that gets really ugly really quickly. So I'm going to stop there. You get my point. When I'm going that heavy on my voice, when I'm trying to sing that loud there, there's too great a disparity between the muscular energy around the thyroarytenoid musculature, the chest voice muscle, if you will, to come into parity for a smooth transition. So when the cricothyroid muscles begin to try to elongate my vocal fold, they're struggling with it, and it's not really working out as well as it could. More balanced, smoother transition, a path forward, shall we say. So yeah, I mean, and that would be the least of one's worries, really. Usually when someone's too loud or too heavy on the vocal fold in the chest voice and into the mix range of the voice, Usually there's intonation problems. I'm sure that some intonation problems came up in all that. It'll be pretty bad, pretty noticeable. Tendency will be to be flat, and so you want to watch out for that. You don't want to be flat. You want to watch out for that. Let me make sure I've caught everything here. And pros and cons versus working with volume when you're practicing. So pros: balanced technique, smooth transition, better understanding of your registration events, better intonation. Ultimately, you're creating habits that you would want to take to your song singing. So when you're singing repertoire, right? I mean, generally, the practice, the vocalizations are about creating positive habits for our performances. That's the whole idea here. We want to create habits. Those habits are what we rely upon when we're in performance, so we don't have to think about our technique. But if we get into trouble, the technique that is there to help us. And I realize I should probably give myself a little bit of a bump if I'm just talking, so you can still hear me okay. Hopefully I didn't blow anyone's ears out. Apologies. The cons are almost too numerous to list. I mean, where do we even begin with the cons of practicing with a volume that is too loud? Technique isn't going to be developed properly. You'll struggle probably. Poor intonation, probably get frustrated with not understanding why things aren't working out, and you're practicing all this time and it's still not getting better. Just for a start. My advice is to move forward looking for the smallest viable sound to begin with and then growing from there. What do I mean by the smallest viable sound? The smallest viable sound allows you to connect all your vowels, have good vowel alignment. E, A, A, O, and U all sound similar. Your intonation is good. You have good intonation into the zona de passaggio. You have good intonation across the secondo passaggio. That means that the smallest viable sound isn't really that soft. It's dynamic, and it changes as you move your way through the different registers of your voice. So for me, my smallest viable sound is probably like that. Not really that quiet. I don't know how loud it's perceivable to you out there, but it's not a soft sound necessarily. If you find yourself looking for the smallest viable sound, singing, that's too soft. The vocal folds aren't connecting. On the other hand, too loud, too hard. Back away, reconfigure. Short vowel exercises can be a good way to get this practice started. I have done, in fact, what I call some intermediary exercises where you go from an arpeggio, wee, 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 wee. That is a good way to work towards getting a feel for a balanced mode of phonation, good airflow, good vocal fold engagement, and then sustaining it through a sustained melismatic scale. Great question. Thank you so much for posting that. Take really good care of your voices. Enjoy singing. Hopefully we'll see you again. I hope that did help, by the way, too. Bye.